Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The news media are liberal. If you grew up in this country, you probably have known that for quite a while. It's obvious in the stories they choose and maybe even more evident in the ones they ignore. About the only people who deny widespread media bias these days are the people who are directly benefiting from it, and that would include progressive activists posing as reporters and the Democratic politicians whose water they carry. But exactly how liberal and how biased is the press? Well, for the answer to that, we'd have to go to social science. And now, for the first time in a while, we actually have some real data. A new study from researchers at Harvard University looked at 10 major news outlets and found the overwhelming majority of their coverage of the new administration's first 100 days was hostile. At CNN and NBC, both purportedly straight news outlets, 93% of the stories were negative, which is remarkable, considering that there's no way that 93% of their stories about, I don't know, pick someone, Fidel Castro, were negative. 93% is a lot. In fact, it's not really news coverage at that point, it's advocacy. So the press doesn't like Trump, we knew that. But it's not just Trump, it's the issues that Trump's voters favor. The media disagree with those too, and they skew their coverage accordingly. Take immigration, for example. Now, there are many sides to that issue, but most Americans believe it ought to be illegal to come to our country without permission. That's why the Congress has made it illegal. But that's not what the people who work in the media think. They believe that defending the border is an act of bigotry, and so that's how they have portrayed it, with no other side represented at all most of the time. The Harvard study found that of stories on Trump's immigration policies, fully 96% were negative. There was more diversity in the Romanian media under Ceausescu. That's no diversity at all. Now, if you've read a newspaper lately, you've seen it. Here's the New York Times, for example. Immigrants hide, fearing capture on any corner. The LA Times. Trump's crackdown sparks fear and anger among immigrants here illegally. And, of course, America's least honest newspaper, The Washington Post, which wrote in a headline, "Immigrants are now canceling their food stamps for fear that Trump will deport them." Where are the stories about Americans hurt by illegal immigration? Well, you'd have to wait an awful long time to see those. There aren't many, if any. If anything, most television news is even more distorted than this.
President Trump drew an X today through the welcoming words of the nearby Statue of Liberty.
Trump has always trafficked in fear-mongering. This time, to stoke those fears and present himself as the country's protector, he chose to punish ordinary men, women, and children who are fleeing terrorism and violence.
This is just a proposal, but already immigration attorneys are telling me it's harsh and un-American.
Un-American. Well, that's news with a message at its core, just like in a political campaign, which in many ways is exactly what this is. Tim Graham is Director of Media Analysis at the Media Research Center, and he joins us tonight. Tim, does this Harvard study surprise you, the results of it? 96% of the stories hostile to immigration?
No, because that's certainly what we found in our 100-day study at the Media Research Center. I guess it's surprising that Harvard would admit it. But if you're studying the media, this is what you are going to find. They are overwhelmingly hostile. And I think what you have to ask them now is, we know you're doing it. Now defend how that's the right thing to do. They clearly feel this is exactly what Trump deserves and what America needs.
What's interesting to me is the moral self-righteousness all of a sudden you're seeing in news coverage and especially on television. So I want to play you a clip you may have seen. It's from 2 days ago, I think. This is over at CNN. And watch how the anchor, this is not an opinion person or a paid contributor, this is the anchor of the show, responds when one of her guests suggests maybe you should be skeptical. Watch this.
CNN reports 2 former officials knowledgeable of the situation confirmed to CNN the main points of the story. 2 former officials. Tell you what, come out, name those people, then we'll have something to talk about.
One, we protect sources. 2, it's not just CNN, it's Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, ABC,
yeah, but who
NBC.
Who are the sources?
Carl.
Who are the sources? Oh, because they're hiding behind this anonymity.
Oh,
and that's what we're seeing.
Please, do not even start with me that you're just going to attack sources.
Okay, so
that
what about,
is ridiculous.
So are you saying McMaster is lying?
I'm not saying McMaster is lying.
Well, he didn't really answer the question.
He didn't answer the question.
He said nothing inappropriate was shared.
He said, that's his opinion.
That would be...
But that's his opinion.
You cannot say, you cannot attack, do not attack the stellar reporters of CNN.
Okay. I don't even know what to say about that, other than 20 years ago, an anchor who did that, who completely lost control of herself and started screaming and clapping her hands, would have been, I don't know, sent on a timeout for a while. She was on the air the next day. Is that not considered weird anymore?
Well, it did. I thought you were going to say it reminded you of Dan Rather yelling at George H.W. Bush. But yeah, the Kate Baldwin there clearly lost any notion of professionalism, and she really should enter an anger management program, at least for when she's on television. But he was making an excellent point, which is the news media today gets to use these anonymous sources, and the anonymous sources can say all sorts of terrible things about Trump, but you attack a CNN reporter, what? That's just intolerable. You can't do it. They start screaming at you when you suggest somehow the so-called mainstream press might, have a bad motive.
Well, he was actually, and Carl Higby's a former Navy SEAL, was making a point that reporters used to make all the time, and I was glad when they did, which is be skeptical. Don't accept things at face value. Ask where they came from. Ask what the agenda might be. Ask what this actually means. And yet now skepticism is a sin, I guess, in the eyes of a lot of the press, if the skepticism undercuts the message they're trying to deliver.
This is a whole week of news media about Trump that's been driven by anonymous sources trying to destroy this president. So what you have is the media used to say, we're not here to be stenographers to power. What they've been this week is worse. They've been stenographers to anonymous power, to people they call current or former U.S. government officials who we don't know. Are they Obama officials? Are they the Clintons? Are they current government officials who Obama appointed? All this information would help us decide whether these sources, what they're saying, might have an axe to grind.
Well, and of course, in so doing, they are being handmaidens to power. These are powerful people who run the government, and they're working out their agendas anonymously with the help, with the credulous help of reporters. Really quickly, I was doing that read a second ago, and it occurred to me, I've never seen a story, I don't think, in a mainstream outlet about the effect on Americans of illegal immigration. You follow the media more closely than I do. Do you see those stories?
They do not want to do stories, for example, about the burden of illegal immigration on the healthcare system. They were very anxious to make sure they don't talk about the burden of illegal immigrants on the education system, our schools. They don't talk about the burden of illegal immigration on anything, on crime. That's all considered like a pro-Trump angle. We don't do that. And they certainly don't do stories like Kate Steinle when an illegal immigrant they've tried to deport several times, murders someone. We had one near my house where an illegal immigrant drove into a car full of nuns, drunk driver. They tried to deport him. Those are stories that they're like, no, that's not newsworthy somehow.
Yeah, well, that's just advocacy then, because that is part of the story. It's not the whole story, but it's part of the story, and they should cover it, or else they're just hacks, which they are. Tim, you know that better than most. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, witch hunts are always a pretty good time if you're the mob. It's a diversion from the drudgery of real life, the rush of pure animal excitement that comes from torturing the helpless. But they're definitely less fun if you're the designated victim of the witch hunt. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher is now discovering this the hard way. Rohrabacher is a California Republican. He's represented the same Orange County district honorably for almost 30 years. In that time, nobody's ever accused him of not loving the United States. Until now. Rohrabacher's sin appears to be holding the very same view of U.S.-Russia relations that Barack Obama held in 2012, namely that the U.S. and Russia have more to gain through cooperation than hostility or war. Well, in Washington right now, that's pretty much the same as violating a loyalty oath. This morning's New York Times reported that 5 years ago, Rohrabacher was warned by the FBI that Russian intelligence was trying to recruit him as an asset, as if that would be his fault. There was no suggestion of what Rohrabacher might have done as a secret Russian agent, much less any evidence at all he committed a crime or an immoral act, nor were there any names attached. The entire reputation-destroying piece was based on anonymous former officials. In other words, Obama-era bureaucrats who want to undermine the new administration with innuendo and are succeeding. And yet it worked. Rohrabacher's opponent in his upcoming election is already suggesting improper connections to Putin. According to the Times, Rohrabacher could lose his seat as a result of that. Mission accomplished, and more proof that McCarthyism still exists and it still works. Of course, it's increasingly unreasonable to expect any kind of rational restraint in rhetoric on the question of Russia. All bets are off when that topic comes up. Today, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California exceeded herself yet again, claiming that Vladimir Putin took time off from governing Russia to come up with Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric. Watch this.
I think that when you saw him absolutely calling Hillary crooked, lock her up, all of that was developed. I think that was developed strategically with people from the Kremlin, with Putin, and I think it's more than bank records.
Richard Goodstein advised Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in both 2008 and 2016. He joins us tonight. Richard, thanks a lot for coming on.
Glad to be back. Sure.
So I think it's fair to have you comment on Maxine Waters, because she's not just what she was a year ago, this fringe figure out in California, but she's one of the most popular members of the Democratic Party, and she's articulating things that are common currency among the netroots, as you know, on the Democratic side. How can a member of Congress stand up and say she believes, with no evidence whatsoever, that a foreign government wrote a presidential campaign's talking points and get away with it? And nobody says, whoa, settle down, Maxine Waters. You know that's true. Stop that. It's irresponsible. Why does nobody say that?
You know, when you were talking about McCarthyism earlier, I thought you were doing kind of a pun about the Kevin McCarthy saying that Putin was paying both Trump and Dana Rohrabacher. And then when people laughed, he said, this is no joke. Honestly, I thought that's where you were going. As to Maxine Waters,
no, it's not where I was going. And by the way, it's not my job to defend what McCarthy says or any Republican leader, anybody. I'm just saying, as an American, this is unfair. People's lives are being hurt.
Yeah. You know
and
what?
In some cases, destroyed on the basis of innuendo, not fact. And that's wrong. It's always wrong.
I totally agree. We should stick to facts. Maxine Waters is going to have to defend herself. But the facts themselves, the undisputed facts, are so incriminating about the possibility of collusion. I don't think you need Maxine Waters dreaming things up between all the contacts between Manafort, Roger Stone, Mike Flynn, Carter Page, Trump's glowing comments about Putin, the fact that 17 intelligence agencies said that indeed the Russians did get behind WikiLeaks to help Trump and hurt Hillary. And
but are you listening to yourself? Wait,
I think the
you just said they're incriminating as to the possibility. You can't incriminate someone as to the possibility. Either it's incriminating or not.
Well, no.
There's no evidence that actually happened. And until there is, why suggest otherwise?
Well, I would say that the piece de resistance is having Trump send out the U.S. press, invite in the Russian press, yuck it up with the Russians, give them state secrets, and then brag about the fact that he got rid of Comey to take the heat off because he said, quote, I'm now not under investigation, which Sean Spicer didn't even dispute. So is that evidence? Of course not. But what's evidence is when all the people I named.
Do you believe what you're saying, or is are these the
those are undisputed facts. I mean, no. Those are undisputed facts.
They gave them state secrets?
Sure. What do you think?
This is having an actual effect on our ability to conduct a foreign policy that's
rational.
What do
you call it?
And in the best interest of the United States.
What do you call classified information?
Russia is fighting. Look, it's not the president decides what's classified. Now, I think the president probably talks too much. I've said that a lot, and I still think
very generous.
But that's very different from giving away state secrets. There's no evidence of that. That's a crime. Yes, really. But here's the point. Here's the bigger point. This has an effect on our ability to conduct foreign policy that helps America. This is crazy.
You know what's crazy? It's crazy for the President of the United States to send out the U.S. press, keep in the Russian press, and give. You may dispute my term state secrets. I bet you anybody out there in your audience.
Your term is wrong.
Well, when you're talking about classified information that reveals assets that are very hard to come by and that gives the Russians the ability to. State secret is whoever that Israeli is that's buried in ISIS in the town that Trump mentioned, that is a state secret. I don't care what you call it. I bet the Israelis call it that. I guarantee you that's exactly what they would call it.
So Trump said, okay, so he's betrayed Israel now. So Trump said there's an Israeli in this town giving us this information. How do you know that? I have not read that.
Here's what we know.
I don't know that that's true.
Well,
I don't believe it's true. I don't know why you would say something like that with no evidence. But maybe you're part of this whole echo chamber that just repeats innuendo, hoping it will become true. Look, this is bad. Because it's not fact-based. We don't know that.
Well, I'll tell you what we do know. What we do know are the reports coming out that were undisputed. I'm not saying the White House has to dispute every cockamamie thing that gets reported. But this is pretty central. If they had a dispute, they would put it out there, and they're not disputing what was said. Even General McMaster did not dispute the essence of that. They talked about sources and methods. Of course he didn't go there. Okay. He said, we got this information out of ISIS.
Can we rise above politics for 1 second here? So Russia is a major player geopolitically. It's got massive energy reserves. It's fighting a multi-front battle against Islamic extremism. We have a lot of common interests with Russia. Why is it, and Democrats are saying this out loud, immoral for the United States to conduct foreign policy with Russia? Yeah. Why is Russia a country that's just beyond the pale? It's like North Korea. You can't have a conversation with Russia even if it helps you. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. That seems to be what they're saying.
I think Russia invaded and took over Crimea. Russia basically undermined the sanctity of the U.S. elections, right? And they taunt us about it. So, no, so we should deal with them? Of course. They're a big country that they need to be dealt with. But to sort of dismiss the U.S. press, keep in the Russian press, yuck it up, and then get classified information.
No, let's just take this step by step. I mean, I'm trying to take what you're saying seriously. I'm almost about to give up on this show.
No, don't give up.
China invaded Tibet and still occupies it. Does that mean that we shouldn't be having bilateral negotiations with China? This is insane, and it's purely political.
And nobody is saying actually that we shouldn't have bilateral negotiations. We shouldn't be giving China classified information. Incidentally, how many million times did Trump whine about what Hillary had on her email that nobody even accessed versus him handing a silver platter to the Russians?
It's not my job to defend his campaign comments, but WikiLeaks, according to the WikiLeaks dump, which no one disputes, the last administration gave information to Russia, to the Putin government, or the government that preceded Putin, but still controlled by Putin, on the nuclear capabilities of Great Britain. So I don't know. Was that treason? Was that in the same category? Trump is not being accused of anything like that at all. This is situational. You guys don't like Trump, and you're making this Russia thing into something that is. This is like insane, actually.
No, it's not insane.
See how irresponsible this is?
I guarantee you, 6 months from now, whenever it is that we get the results of the Mueller investigation, or if we actually have testimony publicly from Manafort and his compatriots, and maybe Comey, I guarantee you, you will not say what I'm coming up with is Adam.
What do you expect? What do you expect we'll find?
Oh, I think we'll find that all the people I mentioned, Manafort, Carter Page, etc., did indeed discuss, and that it was not an accident that the WikiLeaks Podesta emails. Hold on, that the Podesta emails were dropped 1 hour after the Access Hollywood tapes. What I think we'll find is somebody close to Trump said, "Go now. You got him. Go with it," which is why Roger Stone couldn't help but brag about the fact there was going to be Podesta's time in the stock. He just couldn't help himself. So somebody in the Trump orbit said, "Now."
It's interesting.
Let me ask you,
Trump gets elected. Trump gets elected, and I thought Democrats are going to think, how do we lose the middle class? How do we lose the upper Midwest? They used to vote for us. They no longer do. Maybe we should think about, the program we're offering. But no, we get right into Carter Page and Roger Stone and we're in full Oliver Stone land.
Well, perhaps.
I think it's crazy. It's what I really think.
Well, you know what's crazy?
Richard,
what's crazy is admitting all these contacts. Bye-bye, Tucker.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel is calling out his own party, telling Democrats they need to stop being elitist snobs and care more about helping the middle class. Up next, we'll talk to former presidential candidate Jim Webb, who was a senator from Virginia and a Democrat. Has his party gone astray? Plus, retired Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz says President Trump will be the biggest winner from the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel. How's that going to work? He'll tell us just ahead. Well, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel is no stranger to very aggressive politics, so it really meant something when he recently told Democrats that simply hating Trump won't be enough to reclaim power. They need a winning message, too. Watch.
I think we don't talk about and fight for the middle class like we are. We believe we're for them. And I think there are certain things that we as a party wandered off from as it relates to being a party that fought for hardworking families. I think we come off and can come off as a party disdainful of them.
Democrats, the party of the working man, the party of the New Deal, getting called out as unlikable snobs? We truly live in an odd world, and nobody knows it better than former Virginia Senator Jim Webb. He ran for the Democratic presidential nomination just last cycle, and he's repeatedly castigated Democrats for abandoning their historic base. Senator Webb joins us tonight. Senator, thanks a lot for coming on.
How are you?
Can you... I'm great, and I'm just thinking, I remember the day that you were nominated by Virginia Democrats, and you're fairly progressive on the economic questions, more conservative on the cultural questions, pro-Second Amendment. Can you imagine someone with those views getting the nomination in Virginia today?
Well, I can't speak for Virginia, but I can speak for where the National Democratic Party has gone over the last several years, and what I was saying previous to the presidential election and what I was trying to put into a platform when I was running for president is pretty similar to what Mayor Emanuel just said today. I mean, there's no surprise to anyone in that respect. I think what's happened here, if I may, is that we have a situation where the Democratic Party has moved very far to the left during the Obama years, and they can thank themselves in many ways for the election of Donald Trump, and there's a sort of a denial inside the Democratic Party that this is so. They bet on demographics, and I don't think the demographics that they bet on, frankly, are going to stay the way that they thought they were going to stay. On the other hand, President Trump has two serious challenges here, and I hope people in the White House will come to grips with it. The first is the manner in which he is conducting the presidency itself. When you're the president of the United States, you're a steward for all of the people, and it's quite a transition from being a business person. By the way, for anyone out there who's wondering how to conduct yourselves in public office, don't ever have a one-on-one meeting with someone who you believe is going to become your adversary, unless you are taping it. We had a rule of threes the whole time I was in government. I want three people in that room if we're going to have disagreements, and we're going to write our own memorandum of the record. And the other thing is, this is an administration that has not populated its appointees. We're well into the administration. The best administration in my lifetime, my professional lifetime, was the Reagan administration. They brought in highly competent personnel people from the outside world, and they cleared their people and they got them confirmed. And we don't see that. We barely see a cabinet in the Trump administration right now. And how are you going to get your message out when you've got people in these sub-cabinet positions who really aren't demonstrating the message and the loyalty?
That is true. Democrats are obstructing it. Republicans in the House and Senate aren't helping much. So really quickly, I thought, and you and I have talked about this, that after Trump won unexpectedly, there'd be a period of soul-searching where party leaders on both sides thought through, how did this happen, and how do we change our message in order to win these voters back to us? Why hasn't that happened?
Well, one would hope that is happening, but I really don't see it in what this isn't anti-Democrat talk, and I just don't see the Democrats coming to grips with the reality. They're still betting on the long-term demographics of the country, where the demographic groups have changed for a lot of reasons, beginning with the 1965 immigration reform bill. So they're wrong on that. And they're pushing toward the 18, and so the target then is the president rather than the message of the two parties. Both sides need to become more positive about how to get agendas through, and the Trump administration has got to populate its people. And with all due respect to the president of the United States, he really needs to tighten the way that he is communicating in his meetings and in these tweets.
Yeah, I think that's wise advice. He'd be smart to listen to you. Senator Webb, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Democrats praising the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel to investigate President Trump, but top attorney Alan Dershowitz says Trump might be the big winner in the end. Professor Dershowitz joins us next to explain how that might happen. Well, Democrats like Congresswoman Maxine Waters have hailed the appointment of a special counsel to investigate Donald Trump's presidential campaign, saying it's the latest step toward his inevitable impeachment. But one of the country's top lawyers is not convinced. Longtime Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz says the special counsel could vindicate Trump rather than bringing about his downfall. Here it is.
Me the criminal statute. I still sit here as a civil libertarian. I don't want us ever to become what Stalinist Russia became when Stalin was told by Lavrenti Beria, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. What is the crime?
Professor Dershowitz joins us tonight. Professor, I was really struck by this. I don't think of you as a big Trump supporter.
I'm not.
But you asked a question I haven't heard anybody, I know that. You asked a question nobody has asked, which is, what's the crime to which this special counsel is responding? And what is the answer?
Well, first, I'm here not as a supporter of Donald Trump. I voted for Hillary Clinton very proudly. I'm here as a supporter of civil liberties and construing statutes narrowly as they were written. I just don't see a crime here. I see perhaps some political wrongdoing. I see leaking information on both sides. But even if, for example, the campaign coordinated, which there's no evidence of, but coordinated its activities with Russia, and even if Russia and the campaign said, gee, wouldn't it be better if Trump were elected, that's political wrongdoing, but it's just not a crime. Nobody can point me to a statute that would be violated, and a prosecutor is only allowed to look for evidence of a federal crime. And the reason I think Trump may benefit from this is this will be a secret proceeding. Mueller is a very honorable guy, so he's not going to leak anything. And in the end, he's going to find no crime. Maybe he'll issue a report, which in my view would be improper because he only hears half of the evidence, only the prosecutor's part of the evidence. But he will say there's no crime. Maybe the worst case scenario for the Trump administration is maybe Flynn gets indicted for lying. President probably pardons him at that point. But it's 2 years from now or a year and a half from now. And in the meantime, he has a reprieve. If they had appointed an independent investigatory commission, the whole story would come out. And then it would depend on whether it's inculpatory or exculpatory. The public would know. But now it's going to be done in secret behind closed doors. And all we get in the end is no indictment or a lower-level former official gets indicted. And I think in the end that helps the Trump administration, not hurts them.
But I want to get back to your first point, which is that there's no crime even being alleged. So I'm hearing Democrats every night say it's likely that the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russians on the timing of the WikiLeaks dump. If there's no evidence of that, but if that turns out to be true, that's not a crime?
Of course not. Why would that be a crime? It would be like the Washington Post publishing WikiLeaks. As long as the Trump administration or no individual told them to hack the DNA, that would be obviously very different, or gave them information that was useful in hacking the DNA. But just knowing that they hacked the DNA, taking advantage of that fact, it's not a crime.
So this is why there, I mean, you know, I've been doing this almost every night for 6 months, and I'm embarrassed to admit I've never thought about the point that you made, not one time. And why is there then a special counsel impaneled here?
There shouldn't be. Look at the letter. The letter says you should look into the Russian thing and anything that grows out of it. Nobody points to any kind of crime. And there can't be obstruction of justice for the president to fire Comey. That's his constitutional and statutory right to do that. Even if the president did say to Comey, let it go when it comes to Flynn, under the unitary theory of the executive, the president has the right to direct the Justice Department and the right to direct the FBI what to do. Thomas Jefferson told his attorney general to prosecute Aaron Burr. He told him how to do it. He called witnesses, and he, the president, gave them immunity. He called the Chief Justice, who was his cousin, John Marshall, and threatened to have him impeached if he didn't convict Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr got acquitted in the end, but not through any efforts, not through any failure of efforts by Thomas Jefferson. So historically, the president is the head of the executive branch, and he can't be convicted of obstruction of justice for simply performing his constitutional duty. Look, if he tore up a subpoena or erased tapes or put out a perjured testimony, that's very different. But just by exercising his constitutional rights, there's no obstruction of justice here, and I don't see any crime here at all.
Then on what grounds would the acting attorney general have put Mueller in that job?
Oh, I think he did it to protect his own reputation. I think we're seeing a lot of people doing a lot of things to protect their reputation. Starts with Sally Yates. She refuses to defend the travel order to protect her reputation. Right. It goes to Mueller, Comey, who wants to have his cake and eat it. He hugs the president, and then he turns against him. We then see that Rothstein, he wants to preserve his reputation. He does what the president tells him to do, write a memo. Now he's turning against him. We're seeing a lot of that going on here today. Reputation protecting, playing it both ways, wanting the president to like you, but then when things turn sour, turning against them.
Amazing. There are about 9 actual civil libertarians left in America, and you are one of them.
I wish we talked to you earlier. I'm going to speak out on civil liberties, and sometimes it's going to help Trump, sometimes it's going to hurt him. But I'm there to speak out on behalf of civil liberties. That's more important than politics.
Well, God bless you. Thank you, Professor. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Britain voted to leave the EU in part to protest higher immigration levels. Now the UN is pressuring them to accept 10,000 additional refugees into the UK. Katie Hopkins, the Daily Mail, will be here to tell us what she thinks of that in just a moment. Plus, more bad news for United Airlines after a National Guardsman returning home from Afghanistan was hit with huge fees. The day's weirdest story. There's competition. Top that is. Well, the UN is pressuring the United Kingdom to, quote, do the right thing by admitting 10,000 more refugees from war-torn regions every single year. UN official Gonzalo Vargas Llosa said in a recent piece that the UK's laws are too restrictive and complex because they only let children reunite with their parents if they're actually children aged 18 or younger. In other words, like children, like real children. He also says admitting refugees would help the countries they're leaving. He conveniently leaves out their effect on the countries to which they are coming. Katie Hopkins is a global columnist for DailyMail.com and one of our favorite guests, and she joins us tonight. So the position of the UN, Katie, is that Great Britain doesn't take enough people from other countries. Is that true in your experience?
Yes. Well, it's certainly the position of the UN that we don't take enough refugees, and certainly the position of the UN that we only allow children who are under 18, and we don't allow children over the age of 18, which I think you and I would agree, anyone sane would agree, those are actually called adults. I would also argue we give £3.5 billion to Syrian refugee camps. We give a whole bunch of money. And I would also like to point out, I don't think the UN is in a position to lecture anyone. If you Google, UNHCR scandal, the list is endless. People, rape for food, cash for food, kind of blackmail for food. They have so much scandal, so many levels of bureaucracy. They started off with a budget of $300,000 70 years ago. Their annual budget now is $7.5 billion a year. That's in 70 years they've managed to get that much money going their way. They've got 10,000 individuals in what is just another agency. My personal opinion is disband the whole thing, disband UNHCR, get rid of the 10,000 bureaucrats and give that $7.5 billion annually to the refugees. I think, as a British citizen who doesn't want to see another 10,000 people put ahead of British nationals for health and schools and hospitals, I think that would be a great way to use those resources more effectively.
But why this? I've never understood this. Why the UK and the United States and Australia? Why not, I don't know, Japan or China with the world's fastest growing economy? Why does the United Nations never put pressure on those countries to accept 10,000 or 10 million refugees? Why? Why always the UK?
We're such an easy target, I think, because they know we have a whole bunch of liberals here that stand around with placards saying, refugees welcome. I think it's one of those things they see us as an easy place to try and put people because we are a welcoming kind of nation. And people always quote, we have a vast history of helping refugees back in the ages. It's a question I always ask, which is why is it Christian countries are always supposed to host individuals from Muslim countries? If Islam's so fantastic, why not stay in an Islamic nation? But certainly we're supposed to open our doors and borders. And already, we recognise we have 200 illegal migrants crossing into the UK each week from camps in Calais. And that number is only increasing. And we also see from the pictures, all of the boys that said they were under 18, many of them were 30 years old, 40 years old. And we had to take them up their word because it would be against their human rights for us to question what
they
age
were older than I am.
Were.
No.
Yeah, well, indeed.
So really
absolutely.
quickly, our president is going to be touching down in Europe. He's going to be over there this week on his foreign trip. What kind of reception can he expect?
He's going to have a nightmare. He's a man with a huge heart. He's a man with huge emotional engagement with people. He's going to meet with Macron, who's the closest thing to automated intelligence that we have. I've seen people that are more animated with rigor mortis than Macron. He's going to Belgium, which, you know, is the centre of bureaucrats. It is the swamp. He's going into the heart of the swamp, and he's going to meet people there to talk about NATO. All of the countries that he's going to don't spend the required 2% that he wants them to spend on NATO. And finally, he's going to end up in Sicily, which, as you will know, is the sort of halfway point for the ferry that now runs for migrants from Libya to Italy. And the other thing I want to say is that whilst he's in Sicily, all of the borders are being shut down. So the borders are being closed. So all of these liberal leaders that preach to us about having open borders, having migrants go wherever they like, having half of Africa come to the UK, whilst the G7 are meeting, all borders are being shut for their safety.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, I think, about the hypocrisy that we have in Europe.
Oh,
and
of
I'm
course.
really looking forward to Trump coming and blasting a hole through all of that. And he'll also meet the Pope, who said, any man who thinks about building walls and not bridges is not Christian. And of course, the Pope's the one that sat in the Vatican City, largely surrounded by walls, which were built to keep out the marauding Muslims back in 840.
I'm glad someone remembers that. Katie, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, country star Toby Keith is going to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for a concert, and thanks to that... Well, there is so much weird news in the media landscape every day. We decided to create a segment to sort out the weirdest. We call it Top That. Two panelists make the judgment tonight. Fox Business anchor Cheryl Casoni and Fox meteorologist Janice Dean. Truly two of our favorite people in the building. Cheryl, you first.
All right, here's what I got for you, Tucker. I think this is pretty crazy what, yes, United Airlines has done yet again, and that is offend somebody. So First Lieutenant John Rader, he's from Kyle, Texas, was overseas in Afghanistan for 2 years. He was coming home finally. He had his bag. It was full of a Kevlar vest, 2 helmets, and boots. It was over the weight limit for United Airlines. So when he went to check it, they said, you're going to have to pay $200. He's like, come on, seriously? And the gate agent or whoever fought him on it, made him pay the $200. And they told him, look, you can put this into separate bags because we will give you 5 free check bags. They could each be 70 pounds, but he had one bag that was way over 70 pounds. United charged him. The good news, United came back and said, all righty, folks, yep, we're going to refund you the $200. They did the right
They
thing.
should give him his own plane. Finally. Janice Dean, can you top that?
Oh, maybe. I brought hats, props, and pictures, okay? Because my story is about Toby Keith. He's a country music artist. And I used to be a country music DJ back in the day, Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you know this about me. I even brought some pictures.
Yes, I did.
I mean, I never met Toby Keith. I'm a huge fan of his. But he is going to be traveling to Saudi Arabia a lot. Well, President Trump's going to be there, too. No word if they're going to get together at all, but he is going to be performing in Riyadh tomorrow, Saturday, in front of a crowd of men, because they don't allow women, obviously, in Riyadh due to their strict adherence to Islamic law. And so this is a big deal. He's not talking about it on Twitter or social media or anything. It's not listed on his concert listings on the internet. So I don't know if it's going to happen. Hopefully there's going to be pictures. But I do hope that he plays his greatest hits, Beer for My Horses, I Love This Bar, and Whiskey Girl.
You win, Janice. Toby Keith playing to all dudes is the weirdest thing. I can't even picture that. Whereas United Airlines, Cheryl, I believe that completely. But you get a consolation prize. Thank you both.
Yeah.
That was hilarious. Up next, a dean at Yale who praised diversity is on leave after blasting the white trash he was forced to deal with. We'll bring you that story after the break. A dean at Yale University is discovering that it's not enough to mouth empty platitudes about diversity, though apparently it does make you feel virtuous. But you've also got to try not to hate people who are different from you, and that's harder. June Chu was a dean at Yale's Pearson College, and in that role she was, needless to say, a champion of diversity and cultural sensitivity and every other fashionable progressive buzzword, because increasingly that's the whole point of Yale. Chu once wrote an entire article for Inside Higher Ed about the need to consider others' cultural baggage while talking to them. But it turns out that when she wasn't virtue signaling in the preferred venues, Chu had a very different attitude about diversity. A series of Yelp reviews discovered by the Yale Daily News exposed Chu as a woman with a bitter hatred for all kinds of people. She reviewed a Japanese steakhouse, for example, with the following sentence: "If you are white trash, this is the perfect night out for you!" Exclamation point. In another review, she quipped that a cafe's fare was only worthwhile if you are, quote, a white person who has no clue what mochi is. A movie theater review lamented the presence of, quote, barely educated morons trying to manage snack orders for the obese. Ouch. Well, after about a week of bad publicity, Chu was placed on temporary leave by Yale, though she still has her job. We're not going to complain about that because we're not progressives, and therefore we don't believe people ought to be fired instantly for saying the wrong thing. But the whole episode is a nice reminder that if cultural sensitivity is good for some groups, it's probably good for everyone. Well, that's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Don't forget to DVR it. And stay tuned for The 5. That's next.